Coming up on the Joy Behar Show, an emotional Cindy Anthony takes the stand again today in her daughter's murder trial.
What do you mean she's been gone? Why didn't you tell me? I swore at her and hit the bed.
Could the relationship between Casey and Cindy hold the key to the case? Then Joy talks to Brad Conway, former attorney for George and Cindy Anthony. What does he think about the defense's attempts to portray George as an abuser? Plus, the always sunny Kathy Lee Gifford is here to talk about her new kids book and TV's big name sign-offs. That and more starting right now.
Drama in the Casey Anthony trial today. Her mother, Cindy, took the stand and broke down as she listened to her own 911 call from July 15th, 2008. Watch.
My granddaughter has been taken. She has been missing for a month. Her mother finally admitted that she's been missing.
Okay, what is
here now?
Okay, what is the address that you're calling from?
4937 Hope Spring Drive. We're talking about a 3-year-old little girl. There's something wrong. I found my daughter's car today, and it smells like there's been a dead body in the damn car.
Okay, what is the 3-year-old's name?
Kaylee, C-A-Y-L-E-E, Anthony.
Here now with more about what went on in the courtroom are Ryan Smith, host for In Session on True TV, Susan Filan, legal analyst and former prosecutor, and Robbie Ludwig, a psychotherapist and contributor to Care.com. Ryan, can you set the scene in court today for us?
Sure, Joy, a tremendous, I would say one of the biggest days we've seen in this case so far, and it definitely featured the most important testimony we've seen. It started out with the prosecution guiding Cindy Anthony through the timeline up to the point of where she found the car, where she and George were called to a lot where the car had been dropped off and had a smell in that car that she initially thought might smell like death. She went back on that statement, but said at one point she found Kaylee's doll, polished it up with some Clorox. You could see in her eyes the emotion welling up as she talked about this doll and how it belonged to Kaylee. Then they played the 911 calls, and this was the biggest moment we've seen in this trial so far. It went through a progression of 3 different calls, and the third call, Joy, was the one where she finally finds out from Casey that Kaylee has been missing for 31 days. She was on the stand breaking down, could barely take her head off the counter. That's how painful it was for her to hear. After that, they played a call from jail that Casey had made to her family, where Casey just seemed absolutely frustrated with her family, focusing on trying to find Kaylee instead of focusing on her situation. So we saw a very bad situation in court for today for Casey, and a very tough situation for her mother, Cindy, as she testified and broke down crying as she tried to get through.
It doesn't really look good for Casey, does it?
It doesn't look good for her at all. The defense has painted themselves into a very, very dark, difficult, and damaging corner because their defense is essentially to throw her family under the bus. And if that backfires, this jury is going to hate her. And when you see that sobbing grandmother on the stand, the jury's going to have to ask themselves, could those be crocodile tears? Could those be fake tears? Or is she so credible and she's so sincere? The only way a mother would take the stand against her own daughter is because she's going to be convicted.
And you heard what Ryan said, and also you heard it in the 911, that the mother called the police and said, I smell something, a dead body, it seems like. But then when the defense pushed her, I was watching it before, when the defense pushed her, he said to her, did you call so that the police would come? Did you say that so that the police would come? And she said yes. So was it made up? Or?
But it doesn't mean she wasn't telling the truth. It sounds like she was, you know, in the moment, and she was honestly reporting what her experience was, and at the same time she wanted the police to come over and take her cries very seriously.
Okay, now Casey also spoke in that 911 call from July 2008, played today. And of course, I want you to watch this part now.
Can you tell me a little bit what's going on?
My daughter's been missing for the last 31 days.
And you know who has her?
I know who has her. I've tried to contact her. I actually received a phone call today, now from a number that is no longer in service. I did get to speak to my daughter for about a minute.
Okay, Robbie, you hear the affect. It's a little flat. Whereas the mother, Ryan, you hear the mother more emotional. What do you make of that? What's your case study here say to you?
Well, I think Casey Anthony...
Wait a minute, Ryan. I'm talking to the shrink now.
I was just going to say that I think Casey Anthony is the classic antisocial personality disorder personality. She's somebody who's so disconnected from feeling emotions on behalf of anybody other than herself, and we can hear that in this phone call. Now, there are some people who are sociopathic who have a lot more emotion in their voice. She does not.
She's cut off.
She's very cut off.
Although she did cry in court a couple of times.
But she might have been crying for herself. See, sociopaths, people who have antisocial personality disorder, they feel depressed for themselves. They feel like they're victims. They can feel sad for themselves. Just not for anybody else, which is what makes them so dangerous.
Okay, Ryan, how did Casey react in court today to her mom's testimony?
You know, it was very interesting, Joy. At times, she had no reaction at all. She just seemed stone-faced, kind of looking down, or just kind of focused away from her mother. At other times, when they talked about Kaylee, she did well up, and you saw her wiping tears from her eyes. But in that phone call you just mentioned, one thing that was telling is she said in the call, this is on July 15th, she says, I did talk to my daughter for about a minute. That's on that night. So we now know that she was lying about that. And that becomes the biggest problem for the defense in this case. Where does the lying end and the truth begin?
Well, you said before that the defense has painted themselves into a corner. What is the defense that they could have had, though? There is no defense. Everything seems to be against this girl.
Keep your mouth shut and simply attack the state's case, because the state's case does have a giant hole in it. They don't know for sure what the cause of death is. So if they just kept attacking the state's case and say, you can't prove it, you don't have proof beyond a reasonable doubt, but to come up with this other theory, which is based on somebody who we now know to be a cold-blooded liar, we're now going to believe that she's a cold-blooded killer,
But why did the mother believe the lies? I mean, the kid was missing for 31 days, and she kept saying, well, I'm here, I'm there, the nanny...
Wishful thinking, hope
What is that about?
She wanted to. Well, if you raise a daughter who kills her own daughter, how then do you feel about yourself?
Well, you tell me.
Feel like
I mean,
a failure.
you said she was an antisocial character disorder, whatever you said before. Well, the parents raised her.
Yeah, but you can't always blame the parents. I mean, you can have a bad kid and have parents who are good people. We don't like to think about it, and you can have the opposite be true.
But then it wouldn't... Wait a second, let me just ask one more question about that, because if you have a kid who's the bad seed, as you're describing her, and the parents are pretty normal people, the father's a cop, the mother seems adequate, she seems like a strong personality, you don't see that psychosis is building when they're a little kid, when they're teenagers, and you don't get treatment for them?
Well, maybe you do, but also, you know, there's denial when it comes to parenthood, and maybe, you know, the child is really good at seducing the parents. Listen, when you're a parent, you want to believe you have good, talented, smart children, and anything to the contrary is something that's very, very difficult to face.
Reality sucks, you know? Ryan, what were you going to say?
What I was going to say was, there was mention today in court that there might be some jealousy between the two. And this is a theme that we've heard throughout this trial and this case. We've been looking at it for the past 3 years. This idea that Cindy and Casey had this very complicated mother and daughter relationship, and that at one point there was a belief that Casey felt jealous because Cindy was lavishing so much attention on Kaylee. So there is that dynamic there, but I have to say, when you look at Casey, remember the defense's theory here is that the lies and all the imagination that she made up is because of her dysfunctional family background. And in a sense, she suppressed all of this because of how bad her family was to her.
Well, that's the defense's claim. And what you're saying, they painted themselves in a corner on this one, too?
Absolutely, because rather than coming out with this crazy harebrained defense that she was molested as a child, which doesn't mean she didn't murder her child, and that the child accidentally drowned and the father covered it up, which is just preposterous, because again, we've now seen her lie upon lie upon lie. So we know she's a liar based on her own testimony in court through the 911 tapes. How are we supposed to believe this defense? And you know what? This isn't Family Feud. We really don't need to get into the psychodrama of the Anthony family. It's a murder trial. So what does the evidence show? What does the evidence prove? And I think that what's going to be difficult for the defense is after the state is done proving its case, they have not aimed at reasonable doubt, which is what the bullseye would have been.
But I thought they were aiming at reasonable doubt when they said that the father molested her. Even if it wasn't true, they raised the specter of molestation, which then leads to the mental illness.
You use that at the mitigation phase. You use that at the penalty phase.
You don't use it now.
You say, save her life, don't kill her. She killed her daughter, but don't kill her because this is how she was raised. But to make this giant red herring the center of her defense.
It doesn't turn them into having antisocial personality disorder.
Of course not.
I don't know. And also, when you meet Casey Anthony's parents, and I've seen them at the Today Show. They just look like two people who have just gotten beaten. I mean, they seem like very credible people. They just seem like they're horrified by what's going on.
Yeah, Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, there's one way, when you talk about the dysfunctional family and what went on here, there is one way that the defense can make the point they're trying to make, that there was abuse, that this was an accident, but there's only one way, as I see it right now, and that is if Casey takes the stand. Because even as you look at the accident in this case, they're saying George and Casey were the ones who saw the aftermath of all that. George has already said that didn't happen. The only way to do that is if Casey takes the stand.
Susan disagrees.
If she takes the stand, she's going to be subject to a withering, bristling, brutal cross-examination.
I'm not saying she will. I'm not saying she will.
Yeah, but you know what?
I'm not saying she will. I'm saying that's how they make their defense.
They can't,
I'm not saying she will.
They can't make the linchpin of their defense her testimony. And if that's what they've done, they've walked straight into what we're going to call ineffective assistance of counsel. That would be lunacy.
Well, we keep bringing up the fact that O.J. Simpson never took the stand, if you recall, and he was let off.
Well, that was the glove.
Yeah.
That was the glove. And I think if the prosecution puts on the can of death and has the jury smell it for themselves, that's going to be the equivalent of the O.J. glove. Because if they open that can and the jury doesn't smell it, that's going to be like if the glove...
The can of death.
The can of death. They've captured the smell of death from the trunk of the car, so they say, in a can. And they've asked the judge, can we please open this can and have the jury smell for themselves this smell of death that we're talking about? So you don't have to just take Cindy Anthony's word for it or George Anthony's word for it. Smell it yourself.
And this is a terrible question. The smell of death for a human being is different from a dog, let's say, or
unmistakable. There's nothing like it. And once you've smelled it, it's stuck in your nose for life.
Okay, thank you very much, guys. When we come back, I'll talk to George and Cindy Anthony's former lawyer.